and she's been leading the Save LA Cougars campaign to build the crossing over the 101 freeway for nearly a decade. And prior to joining NWF, she worked at both Yosemite and Yellowstone, so has spent pretty much her whole life in some way involved in national parks. So the way we're going to play it this evening is Beth is going to talk to us for about 30, 40 minutes, however long she feels like, and then we'll take questions afterwards. So if you would like to put your questions into the chat, and we'll pick them up and ask them to Beth after she's finished her presentation. So over to you, Beth.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. And again, it's great to see so many familiar faces, so many of you who are helping to make this wildlife crossing happen. And it's a really exciting time to be involved. I have to give a special shout out to Margie. I mean, there's so many special shout outs of me. When I first read about the story of P22 in 2012 and had no idea that it was, I couldn't even believe it. Margie and I worked together in Yosemite, and I called her. I said, do you know this Jeff Sikich guy? Like, I want to learn more about this mountain lion that's allegedly living in Griffith Park. And Margie was working in the Santa Monica Mountains at the time and put me in touch. So the rest, as we say, here we are. We're about to break ground on this wildlife crossing. So, and then again, so many of you, Wendy, who did a great match, Sherry, one of our donors, who else is here, Ed and Louise, who were involved in, preserving this corridor since the beginning. And I can't see all of you, so I'm sure I'm missing more names, but thank you. It really does take a village to get something this monumental built. And special shout out to the fund, Charlotte and everybody there. The National Wildlife Federation is a national group. We are very much about collaboration. So when we started looking at, and when we were asked to help with the wildlife crossing, we always partner with a local group, and we signed an MOU with the fund in 2013 to as the official fundraising partner with us. So thanks, Charlotte, for being there for us, and Art, who was there at the time. But we're getting there, and it's because of the help of folks like you. So happy to be here. And I'm going to talk a little bit about today connectivity in general and why it's important, and then give you an update on where we are at the crossing. And I'll stay as long as the fund will have me. If I don't get to all your questions, I will give you my contact information. Can everybody hear me okay? I have a new computer, and I seem to have to be very close to the mic. So I'm going to share my screen so you don't have to see close-ups of me. And hoping everybody can see that. Let me make sure I have chat up. As Charlotte said, just feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go. If as I finish, once I finish, we'll try to get to all of them. But anyway, let's see if I can make this work. Yeah, my name is Beth Pratt, and a lot of you know me, but I have sort of two lives. Most of my career has been spent working in national parks like Yosemite and Yellowstone. But my other life, as you see here, is working on urban wildlife like P22. But this is home. I do live outside Yosemite. I worked in the park for a decade, and I have to say my great love is the high Sierra above tree line. We have incredible wildlife up here. That's a Yosemite toad, one of the critters I study up here. And then I've been really getting into alpine butterflies above 10,000 feet. There is a checker spot at the Dana Plateau at 12,000 feet. These little guys, these little delicate creatures can fly that high. When I can barely hike up to these ridges is pretty impressive to me. And then some of you, I think, have been to my talks on pika, another animal I study that I'm in love with. But I'm also in love with urban wildlife. And my day job, my job with the National Wildlife Federation is overseeing their conservation work in California. And that has really largely been a focus on connectivity between landscapes and between people and wildlife in these urban settings, because we need to be coexisting with wildlife even in our urban spaces. For me, it's essential. And let's just start off with what's important to everybody, which is cute cougar kittens. This is, my dogs will probably bark because of the kitten noises, but this is some of the newest kittens of the kitten summer, for lack of a better word. And I like starting off with this because it's exciting to contemplate that these kittens might be some of the first to use the crossing when they're grown up. I mean, we're getting to that point, which is really exciting to me. What I like to start off with, though, is again challenging, and I think I'm preaching to the choir here, but challenging some preconceptions, because the crossing and us trying to help wildlife coexist, we're doing that largely in an urban setting. And I would say when I was coming up and getting my biology field degree and starting to work in conservation, which is 30 years ago now, it's kind of weird to think that this was the dominant model of conservation, the North American model. You put aside these preserves like a Yellowstone or a wildlife reserve, and you put the wildlife there and the people there, and job well done. Well, we now know that doesn't work. It doesn't work scientifically, because wildlife need connectivity to connect. So we have to start thinking about our landscapes as more fluid and more about coexistence, because we can't stop putting aside things like a Yellowstone or Yosemite or wildlife refuge. But we also have to open up our own spaces, because the number one threat to wildlife worldwide is is loss of habitat. And so we're not getting back, a lot of that. We have to help reclaim it and give them perhaps less than what we consider ideal nature. But as P22 proves, the animals don't care. It's really us who have these preconceptions. But also scientifically, we know connectivity is essential for healthy ecosystems, whether it be plants or animals. And California is a good example, and the Santa Monica Mountains an even better example. Is you can have plenty of open space. California has an abundance of open space. We get tagged as the most populated state in the nation, which we are, and LA area is very populated, but we also have some of the biggest open space, areas in these urban settings. The Santa Monica Mountains has plenty of open space to sustain a mountain lion population. It's just that it's not connected to other places. So we really have to get at this connectivity issue that is so essential. I was introduced to this concept. Where is my book? I usually pull it down, but I can't find it. By Marianne Hannibal, who's since become a friend. I was working in Yellowstone and read The Spine of the Continent, her book about the Y2Y, Yellowstone to Yukon initiative, about connecting these huge landscapes. And it dawned on me, wow, Yellowstone itself, even though it's a huge national park and has lots of wildlife in it, isn't enough. The wildlife don't know the park boundaries, and these landscapes need to be resilient. It's a great book if you haven't read it, and I'll talk about the pronghorn crossing in a little bit. So we have to start thinking about how these animals navigate, whether you're living up where I live, up outside Yosemite where there's less roads. We have a connectivity problem even in Yosemite. The bears are dying because of the roads and of visitors on the park roads, or in our urban landscapes like this picture, which is P23, who was actually not hit in this photo, but later was hit by a car. How do we get these animals to cross? And the statistics, when you look at it, are overwhelming. We didn't know it like when we put in the 101, and we didn't think about these things when we were putting in roads. We thought, hey, we have a Yosemite, we have a Santa Monica Mountains, national recreation area. Open space is enough, but it isn't. And these stats are pretty compelling. You look at that, even the footprint of the road isn't the only impact on the animal, that you actually go out, that the road itself is just one barrier, but you look at the impacts like sound and light and things like that. Roads have an impact on actually about 20% of our lands. Crashes, if you don't care about animals, but maybe the human safety element is what gets you there. 1 to 2 million crashes a year in the United States with just the large animals. We're not even talking about the little stuff. And then the cost annually to us of our roads and lack of connectivity is about $8 billion annually. So these are not small impacts when you add them up. And again, for those of you in the Santa Monica Mountains, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I think it's important that this is a problem that is everywhere, rural or urban, and we need to fix it. And I think, it's good to point out the animals seem way more adaptable than we are. They are adapting, like look at P22, but they can't adapt to a 10-lane freeway. They're willing to give is a lot, but perhaps not that. You have coyotes living in downtown LA. You have, these two deer. I actually followed this on Twitter when it happened live, who you know, were willing to cross the Golden Gate Bridge to get to the Marin to have a good weekend. And people slowed down. It was amazing to watch this. But you're not always going to have people slowing down, which, as we know, impacts the wildlife. And then the little guys too. We tend to focus on the megafauna, you know, or the cats are sexy and we all love them, but it's not just the big guys. It's like this western fence lizard trying to cross Mulholland. The same impacts are true across the ecological system of our roads. And it's not just roads. What I really encourage people to start thinking about is connectivity in terms of everything. Your yard. Does your yard provide a barrier to wildlife movement? Do you have fences up they can't navigate? Do you have waterways they can't navigate? Will be the best 15 minutes of your life. Google tadpoles, the big little migration. This incredible filmmaker spent, weeks underwater showing the tadpole migration back and forth across the pond, how they feed every day. It is the most adorable footage. It'll change the way you think about tadpoles. But it gets at things like, okay, if you have a lot of people recreating in a pond like that, how does it impact the tadpole migration? This is actually a trail up near me that has got a lot of increasing use around the pandemic with a lot of mountain bikes. I am not singling out mountain bikes. I own a mountain bike, but mountain bikes go fast. And what we were seeing was more newt mortality. That was a newt that was just run over by a mountain bike. So it's even our trails, which again, when I was coming up in conservation, nobody thought anything about a trail. Oh, it's in the middle of plenty of open space. It does have impact. I'm not saying we shouldn't have trails. I love trails, but we have to be a lot more thoughtful around the science of where we site roads, trails, or any of our human spaces to allow for connectivity. The border wall is a great example, to say nothing of the human injustices around it, but of wildlife. You had the same migration or travel paths for thousands of years, only to be impeded by a wall that suddenly jumped up. And I think there's a lot of calls to start pulling some of this down, which I hope happens, because it has been very disastrous for wildlife, again, to say nothing of for people. Oh, what happened here? And then we don't tend to think of our waterways of having a lack of connectivity. But this is fascinating footage. Ooh, if I can get to it. There we go. So this is a whale that's being tracked in the blue, and you can see how he is bouncing back and forth across the shipping lanes, trying to avoid them as he feeds. So it's even our waterways. We should start thinking about how human activity is really impeding connectivity for wildlife. Technology. I'm not going to show this video because I don't have enough bandwidth. I have very low bandwidth up here in the boonies. But if you go to the World Economic Forum, they have a really good short video that shows some really cool wildlife corridors. And Liberty Canyon is the first one they show. The rest are all already built for crabs, for elephants, right? It's for a variety of animals is something I like. Now, wildlife crossings are nothing new. The US is a little behind the rest of the world, but you can look to, for instance, the Netherlands, to Belgium, to on our continent, probably Banff. A lot of you have probably been to Banff National Park, where the gold standard is. And we have the original biologist that worked on the Banff crossings on our project team. We have some of these crossings, and I'm going to show you. We have some of the top experts in the world that we actually paid for to help Caltrans to ensure we got the best crossing possible in the Santa Monicas. And again, the Banff National Park is some of the gold standard. Highway 9 in Colorado, I visited these as well. The deer started using this crossing just a couple days after it was finished. That's how eager the wildlife are to use these. Here's another photo of the I-9 crossings, the moose using it. The Path of the Pronghorn, which was the cover of Mary Ellen Hannibal's book I showed you, you can see the map here. This was a 1,000+ year migration route, which was being slowly whittled away by human development, everything from oil fields to agriculture to a road at Trappers Point. And what I love about this one is they all came together. All these interests that usually don't work together, the oil executives, the environmentalists, the DOTs, and really augmented it almost at every step, this path, so there were no blockages, including the Trappers Point, where the pronghorn, they'd get to this road and were just getting slaughtered. I actually was fortunate enough to be able to walk on that crossing. The pronghorn don't use it all year, and it was just something to see their footprints on it. It's quite a, they actually have a webcam for this, so when the pronghorn are using it during the season, you can actually watch them cross. It's pretty cool. And then many of you have probably seen the most recent viral video with Parley's Summit in Utah. I've actually been to that crossing as well. Really different from Liberty. The project scope's different, the ecosystem's different, the road is different. We get asked a lot, why aren't we making it like this? Well, because we can't. We have different requirements and needs for what we're doing at Liberty Canyon, but this is still a pretty cool crossing. What they were trying to address there was what they call Slaughter Alley. They were getting so much wildlife killed. What's interesting about Liberty Canyon is we actually get very little roadkill. It's such a barrier. The wildlife come up and turn around, which is what's causing the genetic isolation, which is leading to the mountain lion population collapse. So our goal, which is very different from a lot of wildlife crossings, is we are actually trying to prevent the extinction of a species and the isolation of an entire ecosystem, which is why we are doing a living habitat on top of the bridge to connect the ecosystem for all wildlife, even plants. You might not think plants need to move. They do. Seed dispersal, things like that, in light of climate change and isolation, can be just as destructive to the vegetation as to the wildlife. So, you know, it's good to compare crossings, but every site is different and every project goal can be different. The I-90 crossings in Washington, I've been up to those too. It's a whole series near Snoqualmie Pass. And they had one of the crossings, the deer were trying to use it before they'd even finished it. This is, again, how eager these animals are not to have to use our roads. This is a picture of an elk using it. And then one of the newest crossings in the US I'm about to go visit is the Tobin Land Bridge in Texas, which is pretty cool. They are saying this is the biggest in the US, so that's just until ours is built. But you can see they actually incorporated people onto their crossing. It's connecting 2 different parks for people, but also obviously for the local wildlife. It's a pretty cool structure. My favorite crossing, you know, I show a lot of these big overpasses, but what I love about wildlife crossings is they can be pretty small and for small critters. I need to throw this up in my presentation, but one of my favorites, the Japanese have been, they put in these little sort of corridors under train tracks for turtles, which is cool. And then up near me, the Yosemite toads were getting really decimated on this Forest Service road. So they built this little undercrossing for toads so they can make it through. So these are pretty cool things that we can right or wrong, right? We now know. We didn't know when we were putting in roads what we were doing. We now know. And that's one of the things I like about connectivity is we know we can solve it. And in different ways. Again, if you have a fence that might be blocking wildlife movement in your yard, you can cut a little, you know, passage there so that wildlife can move. So let's get into the Liberty Crossing. This crossing has been an honor to work on. And again, I know a lot of you have supported it. I am also not an engineer. I'm not an architect. We have both the Caltrans team, which is an incredible series of talents working on the crossing. You know, they are the biggest transportation agency in the country. They just do an incredible amount for engineering and bridge. And then we also have a 16-person team led by Living Habitats that was selected by RFP, who brings everything from mycology, how to propagate the right mushrooms to go on this native habitat, to, you know, looking at other wildlife and looking at other plants, as well as the partnership team, Caltrans, the National Park Service, Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains, and Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, all bringing their expertise to this. And what you have here, I love these sort of visualizations we released from early on, is this incredible, pretty much reuniting, you know, the sort of the nose of the mountain there that got cut off when the 101 put in, recreating this living ecosystem so that it will be reconnected. This is a view from above. We are at 60% designed right now. So we are not at fully designed. So a lot of what you're seeing is just visualizations. It's not finalized. I've been going to these design meetings. Again, I understand about half. I'm not an engineer, but they've been fascinating to look at what considerations, again, we have that other wildlife crossings don't. I told you we really are looking at creating a living ecosystem because of the project goal. But there's all these things we have to design for because of the sighting, such as sound and light. If you look at other wildlife crossings like the Banff ones, or like the one I showed, the Utah, they get about 10,000 to 14,000 cars a day. Liberty Canyon gets 300 to 400,000 cars a day. That is an awful lot of noise and light that we have to mitigate for the wildlife to feel safe crossing it. A lot of these crossings just throw a chain link fence up on the sides. We can't do that. We have to mitigate for these impacts. Also, just that it's a 10-lane freeway. I would love to build the smallest wildlife crossing in the world, but I don't have the smallest freeway. Instead, I have one of the biggest and an access road. I love this view because it does also show you what we're doing. One of the things we're doing to mitigate the sound is a vegetated sound wall, which again, I can put you in touch with our incredible team who talks about how vegetation can really help minimize sound in a way that just putting up like one of the sound walls on the freeway don't. We have to mitigate for things called the canyon effects, which actually bounces sound up across the canyon. And of course, sound and light on the approach. It's not just the structure itself. Again, you can see this really is not just a bridge. It is a reconnection of the ecosystem across the landscape. And I keep stressing it's being designed for, obviously we have wildlife that need to get across it, like a mountain lion, but we're also designing it for wildlife to live on it, such as alligator lizards or harvester ants, because again, an alligator lizard is not going to have to make a long journey. They don't have huge, like mountain lions, 100-square-mile territory. But connecting population to population is very important to getting back to not creating islands of habitat. And the National Park Service will tell you the same genetic declines they are seeing in mountain lions because of isolation. That trend is showing up in the little guys, such as the lizards and the birds. So it's pretty impressive stuff. This is what we're talking about, though. I used to not show these pictures, but this is what happens when a mountain lion and a car meet. The mountain lion usually does not end up victorious. And as we know from the National Park Service research, this is the fate that most of these cats meet when they try to disperse, which they have to. This is P32, which was a really hard one for me because I remember when they started tracking him, and he did what a good mountain lion should, which is disperse. They have to disperse when they come of age. They live alone. Males will fight to the death over territory. And he made it actually across the 101 and across the 118 and 23, only to meet his demise on the 5. So he could not bring those genetics to somewhere else and ended up, again, one of the all too frequent casualties of mountain lions in these urban areas. This home range map is a little outdated, but it tells the story to me. This is the National Park Service, who again we wouldn't even know we needed a crossing. We wouldn't know the mountain lions were actually threatened with extinction if it wasn't for the result of their long-term study, almost 20 years now. And this is really tells what their study's showing. One is each of those colored circles is a home range. They know from, over 100,000 and counting GPS points. These home ranges are absolutely, you can, hopefully it might be a little small for you, defined by the freeways, which they shouldn't be. They are on top of each other in a way that mountain lions that have more options aren't, and they're smaller than they should be. I mean, look at, P22, he's living in 8 square miles, which a, normal home range for a mountain lion is about 100. It's not that he shouldn't be in Griffith Park. Of course he should be, but he should be able to move in and out. And of course, he's pretty much determined those freeways are too much. So what you created with the 101 is an impenetrable wall. Basically, that freeway cut off the Santa Monica Mountains from the rest of the world. And the mountain lions south of it can't get out to disperse, and you can't get new blood coming in because they can't get across the 101 from the north. And so these mountain lions are pretty much inbreeding themselves out of existence. Those of you who follow these cats, you know they are breeding with their daughters and granddaughters and great-great-granddaughters, and it's becoming a problem. This California Department of Fish and Wildlife, there was never been a comprehensive mountain lion study in California until recently, where they hired Justin, he's an incredible scientist, to oversee both the mountain lions and the wolves, which, by the way, you may have a wolf heading your way. OR 93 is now in San Luis Obispo County. Woohoo! So he was actually only about 15 miles from my house, but he kept going. So I actually have told the project team that you have to design this crossing for a wolf as well, because who knows, right? It's pretty incredible. But the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is taking the data from a lot of different studies, whether it be Winston Vickers down south or the Santa Cruz Puma Project, Dr. Chris Wilmers, and looking at and mapped out 10 different genetic subpopulations in California. And it shows where the genetic diversity is really good. Like where I live in the Sierra, see that blue swath? You have a lot. It's not that we don't have connectivity or road problems, but for the most part, we have a pretty good wide range of genetic diversity up here and the ability of mountain lions to move and disperse. But you look at the Southern California area and you see these small spots of genetic clusters, and that really is what we are trying to fix. The National Park Service, again, who's been studying this for 20 years, has published paper after paper on the genetic modeling and showed that if we don't do something, these cats, again, genetically are going to collapse. We have the precedent of the Florida panther. And I like to joke with Jeff and Seth that last summer they should have published, hey, we told you so. They said the low bar we didn't want to reach, that the Florida panthers did, was birth defects. And what happened? We reached it last summer. Perhaps not surprisingly, given it was 2020 and everything bad happened. They did start seeing genetic abnormalities in some of the cats, a kink tail, only one descended testy. You may ask yourself, well, a cat can live with a kink tail. Why is that a big deal? Well, what it actually points to is the next step could be sterility. Again, we have the case study of the Florida panther where we don't want to reach that low bar. So the good news is this is one of the most heavily monitored, populations in the world. Jeff and Seth and the Park Service are watching this, but certainly this is what the wildlife crossing is fixing. As well as, another challenge that's been introduced to this urban population of cats, in which we as humans face, as well as fire. And I could do a whole talk on how wildlife in California is being impacted by fire. I don't even like to call them wildfires. These are not wildfires at this point. These are human-caused firestorms. And wildlife in California, of course, is adapted to wildfire. If you're a mountain lion, you have adaptation strategies. Mainly, you just get out of its way. But like people, mountain lions can be in the wrong place at the wrong time, much like P-74 was under the Woolsey fire, and he perished likely right in the flames. But what you're getting into is sort of these secondary impacts, which first is that in the Woolsey fire, over 50% of the open space in the Santa Monica Mountains was burnt. So if you're a mountain lion, like living up near me outside Yosemite, and we've had obviously fires every year too, I've had to evacuate 3 years in a row. If some open space burns, you probably have other open space you can move into while that open space revegetates. If you're in the Santa Monica Mountains, you don't have options. Your open space then becomes neighborhoods. So that's one thing to watch. They don't have as many options in these urban areas when fire does displace them. But the other thing gets back to a lack of connectivity as well, in that this is P-64's burnt paws. P-64 survived the Woolsey fire, but was found dead a couple weeks later with burnt paws and likely of starvation. And based on the GPS points, what Jeff and Seth think is that he just couldn't get out of the fire zone because of the roads and human activities. So, again, our lack of connectivity impacts even the mountain lion survival strategies around fire that normally wouldn't happen. And then I could do a whole talk on rodenticides as well as another threat, but I'll let the experts like Poison Free Malibu and the Santa Monica Mountains Fund and others this is something we have to solve. And luckily, Governor Newsom did sign an executive order for a temporary ban, because we can't have these cats and other animals just getting poisoned. If we build a crossing, we don't want them to get poisoned, even if they do bring their genetic material in. So there's a lot of good groups, including the fund, doing work on this. So this is Liberty Canyon from above. This is from a helicopter, and, it really does show the corridor nicely we're trying to protect. This is a little misleading in that, Calabasas is right there and Agoura Hills is right there. This looks like there's just, open space abundant. But as we know, this corridor really funnels down to the last 1,600 feet that is possible, where there's protected space on either sides of the freeway. And that really is, again, there's plenty of open space in the Santa Monica Mountains, and there's plenty of open space north. It's just that the two are isolated from each other, as this map shows. That little red dot is the wildlife, where the wildlife crossing will go. So that was a really hurried sort of introduction into connectivity and into where the wildlife crossing is going to go. I'm going to skip through some of this pretty quickly and then get to an update on the crossing. But I think, no talk about the Liberty Canyon Wildlife Crossing is complete without mentioning our hero, P22. We would not be having this discussion, and we would not be approaching breaking ground without him. He has really articulated the need for a crossing in a way that has captured hearts and minds, in a way that, again, I'm a scientist, but all the science in the world didn't. This lonely, dateless bachelor, who pretty much is trapped by freeways, and that literally has captured the imagination of the world. Here's some great footage of P22. And again, to thank Steve Winter, who allows us to use his incredible photos to tell the story to benefit the campaign. He really does care about the big cats. I'm going to skip his journey. I think all of you know P22's journey. This is my favorite photo of him, though, because this is really what P22 faces every day, is he sees the roads, and perhaps not surprisingly has not left Griffith Park since 2012, because he pretty much is like, I survived those freeways once, I'm probably not going to survive it again. Here's some recent photos. As you know, Jeff recently recollared P22. He's looking great for an old guy. He is an old guy, though. Mountain lions' average lifespan in the wild is about 11 to 13. He's 11. But what's interesting about P22 is, he's not facing some of the same stresses other mountain lions are, much like having to defend his territory from other males. If you look at photos of mountain lions his age, usually they're all torn up like a tomcat because they're having to defend territory, which takes an enormous amount of energy. He doesn't have to do that. So if he can stay away from the rat poison, and he seemed pretty adept at the cars, staying away from cars, I think he could live longer than is typical. Mountain lions in captivity live 25, even 30 years. He's not in captivity, but again, doesn't face all of the same stresses a male, sort of an average male wild mountain lion would. So we'll think good thoughts. He's going to live on the longer end for us. But it's really his story that is helping us get this crossing built and put the need for connectivity in emotional terms that I think people can relate to, more than when you talk about ecosystem resiliency and biodiversity and these terms that are all important and all we use as scientists. But it's really this lonely, dateless bachelor on Facebook looking for females that has captured it. He does have a Facebook account. I think many of you follow him, where he talks about what his poop looks like. And we have Who's Hotter, Brad Pitt or P22 quizzes. Of course, P22 wins handily. And he's a Hollywood cat, so he has a celebrity following. Jared Leto recently posed with the P22 plushie that we use as a fundraiser and educational toy. And then my favorite P22 pose with Viggo Mortensen, my favorite actor, who I got to talk Cougars with for a little bit. And then, that meme that was going around, like your last photo before shutdown. Well, this was mine. I got lucky. Sean Penn and his wife, George, she organized a benefit for Australian wildlife, but also the crossing. So we have a lot of fun with P22, and the cutout really is a way for people to relate to him, because most people aren't going to see either P22 or a mountain lion. And then Governor Gavin Newsom. I think this shows you how the emotional tie to these animals is really propelling that. I was lucky enough to give him a tour of the crossing He's very supportive of it. His dad was instrumental in mountain lions protections. But I just want you to think of another governor in this country that would tweet out, P22 will always have my heart, or any animal will always have my heart for that matter. And it just shows you how P22 really has inspired this landmark conservation project, which has been pretty amazing. But to me, it's more how people connect to him, not the celebrities. And, he is seen as part of the landscape. People want to coexist. And it's this value system that is really, to me, more important. The crossing is an outcome, but the long game is people want to coexist with wildlife. So I think that's pretty impressive. And as those of you know, we use some creative techniques to get people interested and engaged and to teach, because although we have fun with P22, it's making people more comfortable with living with mountain lions and learning the reality and the safety of it, which is cool. We have the trading cards. We have a whole clothing line for him, a new line of masks, which has proved popular, the plushie, as I told you about, a VR film, and we now have an artist doing mountain lion murals. His newest one is actually going to be in Watts, which is pretty incredible. There's these crazy people who have, tattoos of P22. And we do an awful lot of work in schools so that kids learn about mountain lion coexistence and connectivity as part of our work. And I love, they make Valentines for P22. We have a hip hop artist who does music. And we did our first Wildlife to Watts events where we brought mountain lions to Watts. And also, Taranga Ranch brought some of their native wildlife. Here's some scenes from the last 2 years. Obviously, last year was more drive-by wildlife than an event. And then, of course, P22 Day, which I think many of you have been to, and the fund is a partner in. I do this hike every year. I think a lot of you have either participated in or know about retracing P22's route. And in 2019, we had 8,000 people attend P22 Day. In person. We had kids showing off their school projects, and doing dances, and it's just a really, to me, an inspirational event that 8,000 people would show up in person to celebrate coexisting with a mountain lion. And then last year we had to move virtually, like a lot of you did, and we had over 20,000 people show up throughout the weekend at the festival. I don't have time to show the video, but you can see it on P22's page. We actually created this almost virtual video game interface, which was really popular. And we were able, like Governor Gavin Newsom, talked at we had the Black Pumas, this is before they had a Grammy nomination and were featured at the inauguration. They're P22's favorite band. They did a special performance for us. It was pretty cool. And what all this excitement has translated to is storytelling around the world, which again is getting this crossing built, which is 1 billion media impressions worldwide, which is astounding. And it's a value system. Even when P22 decided to munch on the cutest animal on the planet, the koala in the LA Zoo, LA came down clearly on the side of P22, saying, hey, he belongs there. The koala is the intruder. And the LA Zoo even apologized for not having their fences high enough. I think, again, in other states, you can imagine how that would have ended, and it probably would not have ended well for a mountain lion. And not just that, any other state in the country either would have removed P22 or shot him immediately upon detection in Griffith Park. So again, I really thank all of you on this call, and I think the greater Los Angeles area and California itself, because we really do value coexistence. We're not perfect, but coexistence seems to be the overwhelming ethic, and why P22's in Griffith Park and why you have mountain lions in the Santa Monica Mountains in this crossing is going to get built. Safety, I like to touch on real quick. I think, again, I'm preaching to the choir here, but mountain lion attacks are so extremely rare. We are just not on their menu. 40 million people in California, just fewer than 20 attacks in the last 100 years. So it's just not something that we, put the risk in perspective. Again, driving on the 101 is far more dangerous than hiking in Griffith Park. So it's not that we want to diminish when someone's attacked, but it's just not a risk that really is huge for anybody in this state. So where we're at the crossing real quickly, it is an exciting time to be involved. I've been working on this for over a decade, or for almost a decade, some of the partners for much longer. And this is the partnership. It takes a village, and there's a lot of people involved in this, but these are the 5 main partners working on it, week to week, day to day. Park Services, I told you, does the research. Caltrans, it's their freeway. They have been an incredible partner. Like, we want to build this, just get us the money. The Resource Conservation just to the Santa Monica Mountain, helped develop that early design you saw, and of course has all the expertise on the local ecosystem. The Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, had the foresight to preserve the land on both sides of the freeway. If they hadn't, we wouldn't even be talking. The number one predictor of success for a crossing is you have to have protected space on both sides of it, so we have that. And the National Wildlife Federation, my own organization, we do the education, outreach, conservation, and obviously the fundraising for the project. So where we're at, and I should have updated this, we're a little further along. As of March 11th, we're actually at 19 million now. That you're getting that first before anybody else. But we've been working on this campaign, at least I have, since 2012. We went public in about 2014. We signed an MOU with the fund in 2013. And I know a lot of people, it's frustrating, it seems slow, but as someone who's worked on public-private partnerships my entire career, to go from an idea to zero funding to, we will have the blueprints produced in August, and it looks like we still have some funds to raise, but I'll talk about that in a minute. We will be breaking ground in November on the largest wildlife crossing, an immense multi-agency infrastructure project. To have that go from idea to reality in 10 years is amazing. That is a rapid pace. Caltrans has a process. Public planning has to go into this. Fundraising, until you get the planning documents done, you have funders who aren't going to put up the money. So it's sort of this game is, as you get closer to like blueprints, there are donors we've been talking to for years who that is a trigger to their giving. So it's an $85 million such campaign goal that we have. I know it seems like there's a big gap left to get there, and it is. I won't lie to you. It's still challenging. On the other hand, from the conversations I've been having for years, and as we're approaching these trigger points, I feel pretty good. We're still going to break ground in November, even though it looks like a big gap. But it still is going to take all of you. We still need to get there, but it's pretty exciting to contemplate that. As you know, even in 2020, one of the most challenging fundraising years for anybody, one of the most challenging years, let's just call it out. There were a lot other priorities in human health than the crossings. We raised almost $4 million and had a donor put up 1.6 million. But what was more moving to me is the people who were donating $20 and $10 who I knew didn't have jobs. And that's the thing, we don't want to be insensitive in the middle of a pandemic, but on the other hand, these mountain lions their extinction timeline is not on pause because we're in the middle of a pandemic. So we do have to keep going. So we are, I know I'm out of time here and I want to get to your questions. This is where we are, again, hitting that fundraising target. I am living and breathing it, and so are others. The design is going fine. We hit 60% with Caltrans. They will have blueprints in August, and we hit our target, which we've hit every fundraising target to date. We will be breaking ground in November, so please mark your calendars. This may be one of the first kittens to use the crossing, which is pretty incredible. And not that there's any pressure, but National Geographic recently named us the #1 thing in wildlife to look forward to in 2021. So I guess we better make sure this breaks ground. So anyway, let me stop. I went through a lot of information real quickly. There is some of my contact information. I'll also put it in the chat, but let me stop share here. And Charlotte, I know we have some questions, and I will try to get to them all.
Yes, we do. Beth, thank you very much. That was just such an interesting overview with, and all that depth about connectivity, and the update on the crossing was just incredibly informative, and I'm sure everyone would have appreciated. Yes, we have some good questions coming up. So first one from Louise. Caltrans has proposed a flora palette for the Liberty Canyon crossing. And hang on, what does it say? Has proposed has proposed a huge variety of native plants, including some that need riparian habitat. Do you think we need an arboretum or just a crossing with a medium number of plants? And do the animals care?
Yeah. So again, I think I prefaced this a bit at the beginning. Every crossing is different, or at least they can be. And our goal is not just to get the animals across, but to, one of the reasons we ruled out a tunnel is because you can't put vegetation in the tunnel. And also it was going to be more expensive, believe it or not. You would have to you can't drill a tunnel in under 10 lanes. You would have to cut open the freeway and lower a mold in. It won't benefit all species, and especially you're not going to have vegetative connectivity in a tunnel. So what we're looking at, and we are nowhere even close to deciding what the final plants are going to be on there. Again, we're just at 60% designed. The structure is mainly what's been talked about at this point. But the plant palette is more what our choices are. You have riparian, obviously habitat right there that the crossing is connecting. So I'm happy to, I am not a plant person, but you have a number of plant experts from both Caltrans and the team and the local that are looking at this. Obviously like Paul Edelman with the Conservancy and others. But also we know from our crossing team as well, what is going to make this ecological system work. Again, these are people who have worked on crossings all over the world. So we know how to address sort of a multi-species solution. And we've learned a lot. I'll tell you one thing, like the Banff, Tony Clevenger, who if there's like a rock star in the crossing world, it's Tony Clevenger. He's worked on Banff, he's worked on crossing worldwide. For those of you who have been to Banff, you know, like the Banff structures have the trees on them. Tony is like, I probably wouldn't put a tree on it if I had to do it all over again. That is a good example of probably overkill. You don't need perhaps some of the bigger vegetation to get the animals even living on it when you're just talking about a small patch. And obviously, if you put a tree on the structure, that's more of a soil load. So they've learned a lot from what has been successful, both with engineering and with vegetation. But we're not going for, I wouldn't say like an arboretum is an accurate description, but we are looking at putting in a living ecosystem, as I showed you, to benefit a multitude of species who may not just be walking over it, but actually living on it. So I'm happy to put you in touch. But again, nothing's been decided, and a plant palette is not the final plant selection, but plants you would choose from for both the crossing. But remember, part of the project is restoring the ecosystem around it as well, not just the top. It has to connect to the land around it as well.
Thanks. So next one, is there a minimum practical size for a crossing to be effective? I know you touched on that, but if you've got anything to add to that, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the science behind this. And this is Tony Clevenger, actually, again, the rock star. He's the one who actually developed that sort of ratio, which is for every foot, there's sort of a, I won't get into the formula itself, but for pretty much for every foot long you need to make it wider so that the animals feel comfortable, especially when you're talking about a 10-lane freeway with 300 to 400,000 cars. You need to make a wide array of animals feel comfortable crossing this freeway, which means really mimicking the landscape. We get asked a lot, why don't you just put a 4-foot bridge over there? Well, you're going to lose a lot of connectivity for a lot of animals. You may get the rare, mountain lion or some animal that goes across, but that's not a solution to, again, reconnecting the ecosystem for the majority of species. Again, getting back to when we looked at the project goal, it was not a single, the mountain lions are the species we most want to fix, but an overpass allows for the maximum connectivity for the maximum amount of species.
And another one, judging by the home territories of the mountain lions, it appears we need more than one wildlife crossing in the Los Angeles area. Are there any plans for other crossings in Southern California?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, so, the Liberty Canyon is probably the most, when you look at barriers, right? Probably the most major barrier, given that it is the one that cuts off the Santa Monica Mountains. We have the data around it. But absolutely, like, we're not stopping with Liberty. You have Dr. Winston Vickers' project down in the Santa Anas, which they're having, it's the same thing. It's the same isolation. Those cats are getting hit. They can't disperse. They can't bring new genetics. the 5, up near Kostiak or Kostaic, however it's said, I can never get it right. That connection needs fixing. The 118 and the 126, they are not as bad as Liberty. In fact, it's a little misleading. People ask us, well, more mountain lions get hit on 118. Why aren't you fixing that one? Yeah, but more get across, right? That's the thing with Liberty Canyon is we know from so many GPS points, they don't even try, so we get less roadkill. That's why roadkill hotspots are something you want to address, but you also have, barriers that roadkill doesn't tell the whole story. Obviously, if animals aren't even trying, that's where you get this isolation factor. So 118 has an equestrian tunnel, and I think some fencing may help that. But yeah, we're definitely not stopping. It is not, Liberty Canyon is not the solution, but it is fixing one of the most major barriers in the region to wildlife connectivity. And yeah, I'm not, I'll take a little break, but on to the next one after this, definitely.
Okay, I've got a couple more actually. So, if you do well, it seems like you're going to break ground in November, which is fantastic news to hear. How long do you think it will take to complete once you've broken ground?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Based on the current construction estimates, it's actually going to be a phased approach a little bit because we have to, part of the project, we have to relocate some utilities, which looks like it's going to be underground. So it's also going to make those utilities more fire safe. But so to do that, to sort of have the timing all be ideal, we break ground in November on the 101 portion of the structure. And then about halfway through start the Agora Road portion of the structure. And that's probably in total about 3.5 years to do everything. We're actually now, I know a lot of you live locally. Pretty soon we are coming out with a series of education and open houses to help people look at what construction impacts are going to be. We actually are putting together a series of flip books so you can see what phase, what machinery will be there, things like that. I think the best news, we really have asked Caltrans, and I did another talk recently. Most of the activities on the north side where the residentials are, and a lot of the activity Caltrans has told me they don't think will be any more noisier than the freeway noise, which is good. But we are going to be very detailed as much as we can to help people understand what the construction impacts are going to be. There's no, at least no shutting down of, the 101 freeway, nothing like that, thankfully. So.
And I think we've just got one final question. So how can people actually help with this campaign? I mean, I'm sure that people who are on this meeting are more than interested in the campaign. So is there anything that they could do to help out?
Well, of course, there's no way around donating. You can donate. The Santa Monica Mountains Fund has you can donate to them for it. You can donate to the National Wildlife Federation, Save LA Cougars. But, it's more than that too, getting the word out. If you know people who you think might be interested in donating, if helping us with coexistence, California is still, really supportive around living with mountain lions, but we want people to feel educated and feel comfortable about how to coexist. So the pandemic has sort of put a little pause on our volunteer program because obviously there's not a lot of outreach we can do. But if you are interested in volunteering for us, whether it be at events or through as we move into construction, we are looking at probably having either virtual volunteer staff if people have questions about construction or coexistence who are sort of staffed either virtually or at other places where people can walk in and ask. So we're looking at stuff like that post-pandemic. So volunteering is another way you can help. But just also, I tell people spreading the word, sharing the stories on social media. Word of mouth is something that has compelled this campaign. Every time a story, the LA Times tells a story or something, I get a call from another major donor. We want to, give $1 million. So, it really is the storytelling that's moved this forward. So there's a lot of ways you can plug in. Again, it's been a little harder with the pandemic. Our volunteers who are used to sort of doing outreach at, like our P22 Day event, this year became testers for our virtual video game, which was really fun. So, but not the type of volunteer experience they're used to. So anyway.
Well, I think from what I can see, that's all the questions that everyone has kind of wanted to ask. So I'll just say thank you very much indeed, Beth, for joining us today. I know we really appreciate And I really appreciate everything that you're doing and your inspirational leadership for this incredible campaign, and the way that you have helped P22 tell his story so effectively, and basically, yeah, everything that you're doing. And we really look forward to seeing the groundbreaking in November. So, and I'm sure everyone out there is going to want to keep sharing the news and everything on their social media channels, and we will keep doing the same.
Yeah,
So
we should have some updated news soon. We've been working on. And Charlotte, thank you and the fund for being, again, a partner in this since the beginning, and also supporting the research. I think the real important part of the fund to keep in mind, the research is what showed us we needed the crossing. We need to continue the research after the crossing and during the crossing. Part of our $85 million campaign is to ensure that we have $1 million plus endowment to give to the fund to manage, to ensure the research continues. And of course, the fund is going to continue their great efforts as they have. They've raised a lot of money for research in the past and will continue in the future. But we felt that was very important to ensure our partner had an endowment to continue that for the Park Service. So thanks for all your efforts and being a great partner, Charlotte.
Very much appreciated. So I think, well, that's all for this evening. Thank you, everyone who's taken the time to join us this evening. And stay in touch. Thank you. Okay.
Yep, prattb@nwf.org if I didn't get to your question.
Okay.